Hey everyone, it's Colin. How's it going? You've probably seen the occasional DIY video that I've uploaded, but modifying Game Boys is just the tip of the iceberg. This time, let's talk about the maker movement. So the maker movement, to me at least, isn't really all that new. In fact, it feels like it's just a new form of something that's been going on for an incredibly long time. And in a nutshell, it's just basically the concept of making stuff, making what you need instead of always just going out and buying something pre-made. And there are many reasons why people would want to go down that path of making it themselves. Obviously, one reason is because what they want, what they need, is not something capable of being purchased. And that's oftentimes the case that you'll see, like I mentioned in the teaser, about Game Boy mods. You know, you can buy the individual parts, but unless you seek out someone specifically to put that custom system together for you, you're generally going to be expected to do all of that installation work yourself. And that really extends beyond electronics as well. Maybe you have a need for a custom piece of furniture or some other type of apparatus or gadget or gizmo, something like that. You're generally going to just end up having to go out and make it yourself because doing so is going to be a lot cheaper and easier ultimately than trying to find one or hiring someone to make it for you. There's also the concept of just, having a very specific need for something, or maybe you need to modify an existing thing. I feel that the term maker kind of comes in many forms, and it doesn't necessarily just mean building from scratch. If you watch a lot of DIY channels on YouTube, they often talk about woodworking or something along those lines. And that's a very big part, I feel, of the maker movement, but it really expands beyond those larger tangible things to smaller things like electronics, the Game Boys and whatnot, but also even into software and custom code to just do things that you need to do. I'm an avid reader of the website Hackaday. I've been reading that site, that blog, whatever you want to call it, for years now. And while I'm probably not capable of doing a lot of the stuff that gets featured on that blog, nor do I ever really expect any video that I ever upload to get featured on that blog, because it's really just not, what I do just isn't in depth enough technically for what that blog covers. There's a lot of stories on there of really, really intricate technical builds and mods and creations that ultimately serve a fairly simple purpose. One that comes to mind often is, someone has a need for making their life better. I'm thinking of stories like somebody wanted to know whether for sure their garage door on their house was up or down. Maybe they had accidentally left it open one too many times and stuff got stolen, or their spouse got mad, or whatever. And there wasn't a commercial system that could, reliably and easily tell them that. And so they'd come up with a way to do that, and they'd modify maybe their existing garage door opener so they could get some sort of status off of it. And then I'm thinking of some examples where they also integrated sensors into it as well. So yeah, the garage door may say that it's up or down, but they've got sensors to really confirm, is the door itself actually up or down, or did it get jammed up, or is there a power outage, that sort of thing. And then integrating that into the rest of their life. Like maybe they get a text message every time the garage door goes up or down, or they have a website that they can log into and see in real time that status. And it seems kind of silly in some ways to think about all the effort that someone may have gone to come up with a mod like that. But in a way, it serves a need. It does what that person needed it to do. And it ultimately made their life better. and they probably learned something in the process. So, the maker movement, I feel, isn't really just about, well, I feel like building a table or I feel like building a chair. And yeah, I could go to IKEA or some other furniture store and buy one, but, I just feel like building it. It's also about fulfilling very specific needs. I need a table that fits these exact dimensions. I need a chair that looks exactly like this, that sort of thing. It's basically making what you can't buy. There's also several other kind of tenets around the maker movement or aspects to it that I think are really interesting. One of them is that it's actually been really long running. And this is perhaps maybe the most interesting thing. I mean, when you think about it, going back decades, if not hundreds of years, we generally had to make the stuff we needed ourselves. You think about, like, what were houses like in the 1800s? What was furniture like in the 1800s? You didn't, or even older than that, you didn't really have like factories churning stuff out at mass scale like you do now. All that stuff generally was handmade in one way or another. And so in a way, this whole concept of being a maker, it's been around for forever, right? Because I mean, even going before we had modern society, however you want to define that, back when we were cavemen living in caves and had sticks and rocks and went to go fight wild animals and stuff like that, those people, they had to make stuff. They had to make tools. They had to make their own shelter. They had to make everything that they had because, you couldn't go to the store and just buy it. They didn't have machines and factories and robots that could crank it out. And, it feels like over the years, we kind of lost our way with that. We got sucked up into mass capitalism, or however you want to define it, where it became cheaper for us to just buy what we needed. It was easier. It was getting cranked out at scale, and it was just very inexpensive, and it was more convenient because maybe we were busy. And for sure, a lot of that is still going on now. You look at just how cheap a lot of stuff is. I mean, websites like AliExpress and Taobao, and to some extent even eBay, really are built on that principle of it's just super, super cheap, just quick buy what you need. It's incredible. But I feel like at some point, and I don't know exactly when, but at some point in relatively recent memory, we kind of got this resurgence back into, you know what, I don't want all of this cheap crap. I don't want to just go out and buy a thing that I need. A certain subset of people said, you know what, no, I want to make it. I want to get back in touch with these skills, or I want to learn these skills because I don't have them. Thinking where that may have come from, one thing that I can think of is, maybe people at some point kind of realized, or at least the people involved in the whole maker movement, maybe realized that they've only got knowledge as their skill. And I feel like a lot of people who work in some industries kind of feel that way. Definitely IT is one of them. The concept of being a knowledge worker, where your skills aren't physical. You don't have great strength, or you don't have the muscle memory or the hand-eye coordination to use highly sophisticated tools or perform, skilled labor, where your job is to use your brain and your mind and to process information, and really the only tools that you may have is like your keyboard and mouse, something like that. You're not physically getting involved in something. And I've mentioned this before in episodes. I work in IT myself, and I've had some days where I've literally just sat at a keyboard and mouse all day, and you go home and you don't feel very good about yourself. you may have gotten a lot of stuff done being that keyboard warrior that day, but it doesn't necessarily always feel like it. You go home feeling like, well, I clicked the mouse and typed a bunch, and so what? But some of my most satisfying days at work have been ones where I've been out doing something physical. I've been out physically working on network and server equipment. I've been hauling stuff around. I've been installing things. I've been tearing them out. I've been repairing what's broken. Where I've actually gotten up from my desk and gotten my toolkit and went and did something with my hands. And that's very satisfying. A lot of people don't want to feel this way, but I'm one of those kinds of people where some days, not every day, but some days, going home tired and sweaty is way more satisfying than going home, clean and dry and having been in an air-conditioned office all day and all of that. As a side note, I do find it interesting, kind of the difference of opinion or attitude that different cultures have about this concept, where some cultures it's looked down upon if you have to do physical work. And you know what, in some ways, maybe the US, where I live, is one of those cultures. Other cultures, doing physical work is just like a fact of life. You can't escape it, because if you don't do that work, you're going to starve, or not have a place to live or something like that. And so it is interesting to me in a way where we are kind of turning around, with this whole concept of the maker movement, where people are being like, you know what, I sit at a desk all day. And I should note, a lot of people involved in the maker movement are people who are knowledge workers. And they do all of this making as a hobby, like in their spare time or as a side business, something like that. These people, they feel the same way. They're like, you know what, I'm tired of sitting at a desk all day and going home and then sitting on the couch all night and just being a lazy blob and not doing anything productive, at least not that feels productive. And I think in some ways that's a lot of where this concept of the maker movement comes from. It's getting back to having and developing, learning these skills. There are some people who feel like the end of the world is going to happen any time now. And so they seek out kind of an isolated existence, the people who build bunkers and stockpile food and all of that. And there are other people that purposely just don't want to interact with much of modern society. And in some ways, I kind of envy those people, because they are really kind of living up to that whole maker movement concept. They're maybe living off the land. They're making everything that they need, or making most of what they need. Or as soon as something breaks, they don't just turn around and throw it out. They actually go and fix it. And fixing stuff is another big part, I feel at least, of the maker movement, where just because something breaks doesn't mean the whole thing is bad and you need to throw it out. You fix it. You figure out what's wrong with it. And sometimes the manufacturer doesn't even want you to figure out what's wrong with it. They don't want you to fix it. And we've talked about this before in a previous podcast. I'll include a link up above about the whole right to repair movement, which I feel really dovetails in a lot of ways with the maker movement. I feel that both groups really have the same ultimate goal in mind, and I think there's kind of a lot of crossover between those groups. It's not a very clean delineation between them. But, the maker movement, it's not just building from scratch. It's also, like I said, modifying what you have, making it work the way you need it to, maybe fixing an inherent flaw in it. Something that I still need to get around to working on is actually dealing with this camera. I've done an episode about it before, or at least an attempt to fix a major flaw with this camera. I'm shooting on a Sony a5100. I really like the camera. It ticks a lot of boxes for me, except it's notorious for overheating, as a lot of Sony's mirrorless cameras do. And it didn't make sense to me why it does that. And so I did some research and I found some people saying, well, there isn't very good thermal mitigation inside the camera. There's not proper heat sinking. It's not able to get the heat generated from the circuitry out of the case fast enough. And I did a previous episode, I'll include a link to that one too, where I basically took the camera apart and I tried to fix that. And I'll say it's been somewhat successful. I need to get back in and work on it some more. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit hesitant too because I use this camera an awful lot. And if you watch that episode, you'll find that I kind of screwed something up the last time I took this camera apart, and it really kind of turned me off to it. But I need to gather my courage and work on it again. But getting in and fixing something that you have that has a problem, or repairing a known design flaw, working around it, is another form of making something, right? When I'm done, if I get it working, I will have a camera that meets all of my needs and can do something way beyond what its original published specifications were. And that's really powerful. Some people would describe it as sticking it to the man or something like that. But to me, at least, it's powerful because it means that we haven't capitulated to the demands of the manufacturers. That as soon as they say the product life of this thing is over, you have to get rid of it. It's like it's fighting back, saying, no. I own this device. I'm going to do with it what I want. And I think that's something that's maybe starting to resonate with people even more. Not just on the repair angle of my thing broke and I need to find parts, but also trying to make stuff work better. Speaking of trying to make stuff work better, it's a constant battle, right? A great example of this whole planned obsolescence model that manufacturers have put us in, that I feel the maker movement fights really strongly against, is actually from an article that I read just this morning in the newspaper. Yes, I'm crazy. I still subscribe to the paper newspaper. And it was an article about how dehumidifiers are at an all-time high getting sent into recycling centers. Now, dehumidifiers, I live in the northern part of the U.S., although I think most of the U.S. kind of gets covered by this. During the summer, it can get kind of humid, even in the house, if you have your air conditioning running. And so a lot of people will go out and buy a dedicated dehumidifier. It's kind of like an air conditioner in how it works, except instead of changing the air temperature, it's designed to just pull water out of the air. But it works on a very similar principle with a compressor and a refrigerant loop and evaporation and all of that. And basically the gist of the article was that current dehumidifiers that you can buy, and they cost a couple of $100, they're just not lasting very long anymore. They interviewed many people who work at recycling centers, and these people have said the number of dehumidifiers coming in to get sent out for recycling for e-waste is just ridiculous. And they say on average, these machines are only lasting anywhere between 1 and 3 years. That seems really, really short for an appliance like that, especially for one that costs a few $100 and just sits there and runs and runs and runs. It's not like you're driving this thing down the road. There aren't really many moving parts. It's not being subjected to physical abuse or anything like that. And the article basically just said, well, the manufacturers, they're just cheaping out. They're using lower quality materials. They're designing these products in an inferior way. And the article also pointed out that a lot of these have had recalls in recent years where they're just plain unsafe. And the manufacturer, will give everyone a refund for it. And, the item goes out and gets recycled and everything. And it's an absolute waste. It's an absolute waste. Especially for the people who get the 3 years maybe out of the dehumidifier and it's not under recall and it's not under warranty. So they go and they pitch it and they have to go buy a new one. Whereas dehumidifiers from 20 years ago may still be cranking along. This really is potentially a case of they don't make them like they used to. And, so what would a maker do? Well, they'd look at that and they'd try to figure out what the problem is with it. What's the major cause of it? Something that article pointed out was that a lot of times components will rust out inside. Well, so a maker may look at that and go, okay, well, it looks like this part is made out of this material and it's, touching this other part or whatever, and it's going to be prone to rust. Or it's going to be prone to fail early. So they'll go and they'll actually do something about it. Maybe they'll identify these parts before they fail, or maybe even after they fail. And they'll design new ones, or they'll put in place some kind of fix to get the thing up and running again. And this is where I guess the other part of this topic comes into play, in that I feel we've had now more than ever more opportunities to be makers, if for no other reason than because of all of the tools we have available to us. And I'm not just talking basic hand tools. I mean, there are a ton of vendors of hand tools now. It's kind of sad. I used to be a really big fan of Craftsman. Sears was, that was their big brand, and generally they were considered a good quality product. Not necessarily professional in nature. You wouldn't walk into a professional auto mechanics shop and open up one of the drawers of his toolbox and see a whole bunch of Craftsman in there. I mean, some of them did, but most of them probably not. But they were just good, solid, kind of DIY-er, home gamer kind of tools. And those have really gone by the wayside because mostly Sears is almost all but bankrupt and they've sold off that brand and it's going to get cheapened. But a lot of other brands have stepped up to fill that void. So we've got a much better selection now of tools, I feel, than we ever have before. And not just in terms of the tools that we're familiar with, but also with new tools or more convenient tools. Like about a year ago, I bought a new drill and, kind of cordless combo set. And it was $100 and I got a drill and an impact driver and a pair of batteries and a charger. All of that for $100. This is one of those kind of, the neon green Ryobi kits you can buy at Home Depot or a lot of other vendors based on what country you live in. Are they professional quality tools? No. Are they good enough? Yes. But for $100, they work surprisingly well. And that's the case with a lot of tools. The prices for tools that are good enough really seem to be kind of coming down. No, you don't always need professional quality tools. I mean, I could have gone out and bought an equivalent kit from, say, Makita, and it would have been like $400. Would it last longer if I used it all day, every day? Yeah, it'd be a better quality tool, but I don't use it all day, every day. So the Ryobi works fine. We've also got completely different tools available to us now as well. Things like laser cutters and water jet cutters and mills. And they're shrinking in physical size as well as cost. Laser cutters used to be this thing where decades ago it would be an industrial tool and it would cost hundreds of thousands, if not $1 million or more, based on the size and complexity of it. And it was the kind of thing that only a big company would buy because they were using it to make a ton of money. You know what I mean? Like the investment made it worth it for them to buy a big expensive tool like that. And now the prices on laser cutters, albeit small ones, a few $100. I mean, they're cheap. And they're becoming simpler to use. Instead of needing to know all this crazy machine code and typing it all out or using proprietary systems or punch cards or floppy disks or whatever to store all these programs for what it's going to cut. Now we've got web-based tools that can go and point click. You can design what the shape of the thing should be and how what the dimensions are and how thick should get cut and all of that. And it's pretty straightforward to use. And the big one, the really, really big one, at least to me, is 3D printing. I think a lot of people may agree with this. 3D printing has really kickstarted its own cottage industry in a way, or its own capabilities for growth and expansion and learning on the part of makers. Instead of having to work in this, I'm trying to remember the term for it. Basically, it's this like reductive process, where you take, say, a solid piece of something and you carve away what you don't need until you have the shape of what you want is left. Now you're working in this additive process where you design it all out, of course, again, in 3D on the computer using pretty straightforward tools. And it just goes and prints it, right? You pick your material. It's usually a spool of some sort of plastic or nylon. They call it filament usually. It's pretty thin, although you can get different sizes and different grades and colors and capabilities. It's kind of crazy now. But it just goes and it's got this, what they call the hot end. It's basically a nozzle that heats up and it feeds that filament into it and it just kind of drives around. And it can go up and down and left and right. It can go in all sorts of directions. And it just builds up what you want to print layer by layer. Yeah, it can take a while, but it generally works really well. They started out as being prototyping type of devices. Again, like back, the 3D printers aren't really all that new. They've been around for a while, but like with laser cutters and other tools like that, they started out very big and very expensive, so that only companies needed to buy them or could afford to buy them. But as time has gone on, they've gotten smaller and simpler and, most importantly, less expensive. So now regular people can buy them. Case in point, something that got a lot of people's attention, or at least a lot of makers' attention in recent months, has been a new 3D printer that Monoprice put out. If you're not familiar, Monoprice is a company that really made a name for itself selling inexpensive cables. You'd go to a big box store and you'd buy an HDMI cable for $25, $30, something like that. You can go to Monoprice and there's a whole bunch of other storefronts like them now that do this same thing, but they sell those cables without much markup. I mean, enough markup for them to keep going, but you'd buy that same HDMI cable for $5, $4, something like that. And it really just exposed the markup that the big retail stores have on accessories like that. And it just made it a lot easier for people to kind of get those odds and ends cables that they need. But Monoprice, of all places, started selling a 3D printer. It's a small little tabletop one. It's not big by any means. It's really, meant for making kind of smaller items. But it's only a couple $100. And that got a lot of people's attention because before that, even with the reduction in price and complexity of 3D printers, you were still looking at least a few $100 to about $1,000. I feel like $1,000 was kind of the sweet spot for 3D printers. If you could afford a $1,000 3D printer, you'd be getting a pretty good machine. But Monoprice has one, albeit again small, for just a couple $100. Is it going to be useful for everybody? No. But what it could be useful for is at least learning 3D printing. You pick one of those up and you start printing out random little things just to get used to what the process is and what some of the pitfalls are and how the software works. And then you can graduate on to bigger items for whatever it is you need, whether you're building a repair part or maybe you're building a custom housing for a thing that you built. Maybe you're working on an awesome Game Boy Raspberry Pi Zero kind of thing and you want to print your own custom handheld enclosure for it. 3D printing can get you there. So that's what's super exciting about the maker movement these days, is it's becoming more and more accessible. Not just in terms of tools, but also information. So, and that's really where I want to close this one out, is in some ways I consider myself a maker. I don't think it'd be fair to not call me a maker in some ways, because I am, doing DIY projects. I am putting stuff together and making what wasn't there before. And outside of the channel, I'm very much a maker because I'm always doing home improvement kind of stuff, and I'm building things at work and that sort of thing. But makers really take many forms. And a common thread that I've found is a lot of makers want to share their knowledge, which I'm always impressed with. I talked about quite a while ago an episode about speedrunners in video games and how impressed I am with that community and how open and welcoming and sharing that community is. And you know what? I feel like makers are right there with them. You can find tons of information that people have shared, whether it's a 3D model of something that they made themselves, and, they could be selling the print of that. Maybe they're making 3D prints of it. They could be selling it, but a lot of times they're just going to give that design away for free. And they'll accept feedback and criticism and, ways to make that better. It's an iterative process. And even here on YouTube, there are a ton of channels of YouTubers who are DIYers and creators and makers, and they take all forms. Some of the channels are like mine, where I'm basically, doing Game Boy and console electronic mods, that sort of thing. There's a lot of course, woodworkers. There's a lot of metal workers on YouTube, and they expose facets of those industries that regular people just generally wouldn't see. I know more about machine work now than I did 5 years ago because of YouTube. And it gave me a great opportunity to start to even use a little bit of that in my daily life, at work, that sort of thing. Maybe I'm not actually doing machine work itself, but I'm able to intelligently talk about it when I say I need a piece of metal that can do this, or I need equipment that can do that, or something like that. So really, the maker movement, I think, has been with us for a very long time, and only somewhat recently has it kind of turned into almost fashionable thing, where it's gone from just being, I'm in my garage building a new dining room table for my kitchen, to, hey, I'm going to build a really cool dining room table. Not because I can't afford to go out and buy one, but because I want one that's exactly the way I want it. And I want the satisfaction of having built it myself, is really kind of the sentiment that I'm seeing and feeling now. And I just think that's awesome. I like it when people take initiative and go and learn things that they didn't have before, and actually be active and not just, be passive and take things for what they are and kind of give up in a way. So with that, I'm curious, of course, as to your thoughts. Do you consider yourself a maker? Do you consider yourself a DIYer? Have you done much of that kind of work? If you have, what kind of work do you do? If you haven't, why not? Has there been something that's kept you from doing it? Has it been time or money or interest or access to information materials? I'm really just kind of curious as to, what the spectrum of answers is out there. So be sure to leave those down in the comments below. So if you liked the video, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at thisdoesnotcomp. And as always, thanks for watching.